turned on here. Okay, Joey, I don't know which channel I'm on, but it's the new microphone. We have good quality people here tonight. Quantity is a little off, but the quality is great. And if we go along according to schedule, by the time we get through, we'll probably have another half of this many back in here, and we'll have a greater number than when we end than when we begin. So if you got your announcement sheet, we'll try to go over these. Some of these are repetitious in that we've had them on the prayer list for a little while. Some of them are people who've called in. Janice Godwin was moved to the rehab over at the nursing home. She's in 807 or 8. 608. I knew there was an 8 in it somewhere. Hall 6, yeah. And I think I put it somewhere at 607, but it's 608. There is an 8 in there. And doing remarkably well. If you go see her, you'll be surprised how well she's feeling, and her attitude is so positive and up. And if you're feeling bad, go visit Janice with her quadruple bypass, and you'll feel better. So we're thankful for that. I'm not sure how long she's going to be over there, but for a little while. Mildred Smith is scheduled to have a pacemaker installed next Tuesday morning over at Southeast Medical Center in Dothan. Rebecca Morrow's grandmother, Martha Hicks, fell and broke her collarbone. And there's some possible problems because of osteoporosis, if I said that close to right. JM had his hand surgery on Tuesday, and that went pretty good. They're waiting in Texas. They were trying to get in the Fisher house, but had not gotten in last I'd heard, unless they got in today. So they were living out of a motel, and they like the Fisher house because they can do their own cooking and be more at home there. But so maybe there'll be an opening there soon. Nadine has a couple of people that she's asked us to keep in prayers. Benny Burchett, who is her cousin. He's not doing well. Hospice continues to help with him. And then her niece came through surgery but still needs prayers for healing. Mandy Powell, I've not had an update on her other than she came. Oh, okay. Great. Sandra Mack is at home. I haven't really had an update from her. Has anybody heard from Sandra in the last? I haven't heard from her at all this week. So she was supposed to go back to the doctor some. Remember those on our continuing prayer list. I visited with you today. It was not his best day today. He was very confused today. He asked me who I was 2 or 3 times, and they'd call me because he was upset because he didn't come to church last week and doesn't look like he's going to come next week. And by the time I got over there, he had moved on kind of from that being his issue to some other things. But keep Hugh in your prayers. And Hugh's another one that can be a relatively short visit, but means a lot to him if you can stop by and just speak. And now you're going to have to sit close to hear him, and you're going to have to lead the conversation a lot of the times. But he does recognize people, and I think it's just a bad day today. Continue to remember Gerald Mercer. If I'm not mistaken, not only was he having kidney problems, but they found a spot on his liver, I think was right. And they were going to be treating that as well. Anybody have an update on Harley Underwood? He continues to... Did he have the procedure done? Okay. So hopefully that'll give him some relief. Remember those who are overseas. For those of you who are long-time Enterprise folks, you probably have heard that Dr. Joe Herod, the pediatrician, has just is not, well, they discontinued life support, I think it was on Monday, and his vitals are still strong, but they don't give any hope of recovery. And just remember his family. He probably treated most of the children in this town during his more active days, and even up until the time he retired, he was one of the most active pediatricians in town. So keep Dr. Joe in your prayers as well. There's a silent baby shower celebration. Now, those of you who know how well I am up on the shower rules, you're going to have to read this to figure it out. But the way I understand it is basically you buy a shower gift and don't have to go to a shower. You just bring them here and they're going to be delivered. But you got to get them here by June the 4th. If you want to get them there before the baby gets here and his grand appearance, I assume that Heather is going to be out there pretty quick, and my guess is we're sending them by her. But I don't know. But just if you want to be a part of that and send the baby shower to Ashton and Hannah's baby, there's the information on that. Agape cans should be turned in, I guess, Sunday, Dan, is that right? I don't have a can to shake and make money, but just visualize it, if you will. But it's time to turn them in. Checks are acceptable. Money, cans, however you want to give it. It's good work to be continued. May 28th, we did have a fellowship scheduled for them, but because of the supper and singing and the graduation supper last night, we decided to forego having another grand meal of the church all within a week and a half. So May 28th, there will not be a church-wide fellowship. Next Wednesday is the last Wednesday of the month. We supper and sing and supper on the last Wednesday, not the fourth one. For some reason, somebody started a rumor. I say that because we had about 10 calls today asking if we were doing regular class or singing and supper, and we've never had those calls before. So if you did it, remember it's the last one. I don't know who did it or how it happened. The last one that asked me the question was my wife. So, but it's always on the last Wednesday night of the month. We just happen to have 5 this month, and that's a little unusual. But if you brought tacos, we can meet afterwards and eat them anyway. Mark's bringing possum. Would that be taco possum or ground possum? Okay. Wiregrass Christian is doing a fundraiser. They have a cookbook that they've done. $15 if you're interested in that. See Joan or Michelle, and they will help you out with that. Camp Wiregrass, the last Saturday work day is this Saturday. That's probably a little bit less than true because we'll be working up until the time people come in. But this is the last Saturday before we have campers coming in on Sunday. So I know we've had some people go out during the week. We had pretty good turnout last Saturday. We were able to uncover the pool. I saw another group come in the afternoon and did some work on some fences, and Littleton was working on the chapel, cleaned the floor at the pavilion. But I'm guessing it's not all done, is it, Joel? So if you'll check with Joel or check with us in the office, we'll contact folks upstairs, or you can probably just go out there and see what needs to be done. But if you want a job and know what tools to bring with you and whatever, Joel can update you tonight, or we can get you in touch with the camp office. Is there any other announcements that need to be made? The first Wednesday in June will be the first of our special Wednesday night speakers. On the back of your announcement sheet are listed those speakers. what their topics are. Also listed there is a list of the dates for Camp Wiregrass if you've got somebody that you want to go. Every summer we always make this appeal. It's open all the time. Camp is a nonprofit in the real sense of the word. We're not trying to make money out there. We're trying to provide a service. And if you would like to donate, usually we say to a scholarship fund, but to donate to help camp, if you'll make your check payable to Camp Wiregrass, I think $130 covers the cost of a child at camp now. And but we'll take half of that. We'll take a fourth of it. We'll take whatever you got and use it in making sure. Our policy is that nobody who wants to go to camp is going to be turned down if we can possibly find a way. And usually we work that out just about even. We don't make money, but if you want to support that work or see that a child goes to camp that might not otherwise get to go, if you'll make those checks out to Camp Wiregrass, we'll get them to the appropriate place. Anything else? Okay, Larry, would you lead us in prayer? I think I forgot to mention Sandra Miller. She's still having some problems, and we want to keep Sandra in our prayers as well. We want to look at the parallel reading. If you'll turn over to Luke chapter 6, this is going to be similar to what we looked at last week, but there are a few differences. We talked about the judge not that you shall not be judged. And so if you'll turn to Luke chapter 6 and verse 37, we'll pick up the parallel reading for tonight and begin our studies there. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. All that's in one verse, but it kind of expands a little bit from what Matthew was saying when we read last week. He gives it in three pieces here. He says that we shouldn't judge because we're going to be judged. But what did we talk about last week about what kind of judgments he was talking about? Are there judgments that we must make? Yes. The thing that I think is the crucial element of this understanding is we've got to use the right standard of judgment. We can't judge by my feelings or your feelings because, quite frankly, you and I can be wrong. But we must judge by God's standards. Not my interpretation of God's standards, but when God says what He said, He meant it. When we begin to explain why God didn't mean what He said, we're in deep water. And again, Luke kind of pulls it out in a little bit different sense where he comes back and he reiterates, and James pointed this out last week, that this judging is also talking about condemning. And Luke kind of brings that out. He says this judgment that we're giving, when we start telling people, forgive my language, but I don't know how to say this better. When we can go around telling people you're going to hell because you don't believe what I believe, that's the standard we're going to be judged on. You're not going to hell because you don't believe what I believe. You're going to hell because you don't believe what God believes, what God said. So anytime I put myself in that equation, it's the wrong equation. It's not my belief against your belief. It's what did God say? And when we start judging on men's conception, then we've caused a problem. But then, if you'll look at the third thing that he says, the third kind of, I guess it's almost a couplet because it gives the first part, and then he says, forgive, and what will happen? So the opposite of that is, if you don't forgive, what's going to happen? If you're not forgiven, what's going to happen? You're going to be condemned. So don't be judging. So if you read that frontwards and backwards, that makes sense. Go up the ladder, go down the ladder, and then back up the ladder, and you'll see it's a circle there that says we don't need to be judging, we don't need to be condemning, because we need forgiveness and we need to be forgiving. One of the things that you'll hear me say an awful lot is I need as much forgiveness as I need to give. I don't know some of you people who walk the perfect life and don't have struggles and don't have failures and don't have problems and never need to be forgiven for anything. Maybe you're not in that boat, but for me, I need all the help on my side I can get to get forgiveness, and that means I need to be forgiving. Before we go any further, does that mean I need to be open to anybody's sinful lifestyle? Absolutely not. But if a person truly repents, even when they've sinned against me, I need to forgive them. And that's hard for us to do in our culture, isn't it? I'll never speak to him again. I'll never speak to her again. I'll never invite them back to my house. I won't go out the same door of the church building they go out of. And I have a suspicion that if you won't go out the same door in the church building, you're not going to go into the same golden gates in eternity. So that first verse is kind of a review of what we said. But then verse 38 is still in the same concept when he says, given it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall man give into your bosom. For with what measure you shall meet, with it shall be measured to you again. How many people have ever heard this passage before? Shaken down, good measure. Where do you usually hear it in sermons? What point is it usually making? It has nothing to do with your contribution. In context, it has nothing to do with your contribution. There's a lesson and some lesson you can pull out of that, but that's not what it's talking about here. What's he talking about? He's talking about the same thing he talked about in the last verse. He's talking about forgiveness. Now, in the time of Jesus, people didn't have pockets. And so when they went to the market to get grain, which is the illustration here, a good honest merchant would do what? Shake it down and make sure you got a good measure, you got what you paid for. And that's the illustration. It's a marketplace illustration. But read the passage, read the verse again. What does he end up with here when he's saying that you're measuring, how you measure for somebody else is how you're going to be measured? And that's the same thing with the same judgment you judge, you're going to be judged. How many of you like to be cheated if you go to the store? None of you? You people are not very understanding tonight. How many people ever go up and say, I'd like a 5-pound bag of sugar, but just give me 3 pounds, but charge me for 5? We want every bit that we're buying. Are we as always honest in what we're giving? I hope we are. But I don't think he's talking about what happens in the market. I think he's talking about what happens in life. Am I as forgiving as I am forgiven? Because the measure that I judge you against, I'm going to be measured against that same measurement. If I'm calling for sinless perfection, how many of y'all are going to make it? How many of you think I'm going to make it? There you go, judging again. Well, you just missed that whole judge not part, didn't you? If it's sinless perfection, it's Jesus alone. The rest of us are in trouble. So my question is Jesus teaching a lesson about mercy and grace? Could it be? He's saying when we're so judgmental, we might not ought to be holding people to exacting standards that we cannot keep. So keep that in mind as we continue reading. He spake a parable unto them, saying, Can blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into a ditch? What's this illustration in reference to? It's an equality, isn't it? Can the blind lead the blind? What's going to happen if the blind lead the blind? Fall into a pit, fall into a ditch. That's the figurative. What is it? What spiritual or physical implications can you think of? The physical was falling into a ditch. What spiritual implications? Because Jesus is teaching spiritual lessons. Go ahead, David. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. That is the way the world thinks. No. I think that the passage, and we talked about this last week, it's not saying you can't ever judge or make judgment about something. It's what standard are you using for the judgment. When people ask me about instrumental music and worship, I want to tell you the Bible doesn't say a lot about instrumental music and worship. You can cherry pick a couple of scriptures about sounds like harps in the book of Revelation. You can go back and talk about David's psaltery, and you can talk about that. But it doesn't say a whole lot. It says sing and make melody in your heart and that kind of stuff. To me, the question is always, what is the standard of authority? Do I have authority to do something? Or do I not have authority to do something? Where do I get my authority to change? God said to sing. Ephesians 5:19, right? Sing and make melody in your heart. Y'all have heard that? Next time somebody asks you about this topic, ask them, is it wrong to sing without instruments? What kind of answers do you think we might get? Might get a no. You might get, well, it just sounds better with them. That's not the question we ask, though, is it? The question we ask is, do we have authority to bring in other things? For instance, what's something else we could bring into the singing besides instrumental music? What about dancing? Go back to Ecclesiastes 12. There's a time to dance. Anybody remember the next part of the scripture? There's a time to refrain from dancing. So there's a time and a place for everything and a season ever under heaven, but there's a time also to refrain from things. If God says this is the way I want to be worshipped. Now, I got to tell you, if I get to heaven and God said, Keith, you had all that stuff about instrumental music wrong, it was okay to use the whatever somebody uses, but you sang and you worshiped me, I think I'm going to be okay. Yes. You know the literal translation of a cappella? As sung in the chapel. The original language, when it talks about a cappella music, if you do the research on that word, a cappella means as sung in the chapel of the early, talking about the early church, because it didn't have instrumental music. In fact, if you go back and read the church fathers, you'll find that they said that they did not want to use the instrument because they did not want to appear to be Judaizing. because the Jews use the instrument in worship. It's kind of like baptism. When people question the mode of baptism, our problem is we have a translated word rather than a transliterated word rather than a translated word. If we translated baptizo, it would be to immerse. That would answer the question. Can you immerse by sprinkling? That'd take a lot of sprinkling and a big hole to be stuck in. Yesterday's rain kind of, maybe if you found the right hole, you might could have been immersed if you stood in one place long enough. But the word means to immerse, to dip, or to plunge as under the water. So if you're looking at what the word says, you can look at church history, you can look at the definition of the word. But to me, the judgment standard we have is the Word of God, and it simply does not authorize instruments. Like I said, if I get to heaven and I found out that I missed it on that, I have not missed it on worshiping God in song. Because I know the Bible says that I'm to worship Him. Both Paul wrote the Colossian church and the Ephesian church, and he said the same thing to both of them. What we're talking about here is what is our standard of measurement. If I were to go into the chemistry classroom, into the lab, would it matter if I knew what a kilogram was or not if I were mixing up certain... Joel, I never went to pharmacy school. Does it matter how much of stuff you put into the medicine? I cook and say, well, this looks good. I'll put a little more salt on it. Can you make a pill that way? And say, well, I think it needs to be a little redder. Let's put some more of this in there. There's a problem with that. There's a standard. There's a scale. You put this many grams in there, or milligrams, or whatever it is that you're putting in there. How many of you want to go to the pharmacy that says we're going to mix it? In fact, a lot of people who are addicted to street drugs are nuts because they don't know what's going in the medicine. I mean, I don't know how to make meth, but when they start talking about making stuff out of lye, that sounds like a bad thing to me. Battery acid, I don't want to take any of that. Just because you're a registered pharmacist doesn't mean you can look and say that looks like a gram to me. Or it looks like potassium to me, or it looks like maybe, I don't know, whatever goes. I just had some drug that had potassium in it the other day. I don't know what I'm taking it for. They have to have what? Their torque wrenches checked. Does authority matter? Does it matter that I have a standard of authority? If I wanted to do surgery and I was going to operate, they talked about this girl that had brain surgery. I know where the brain is. Anybody want to offer to let me do your next brain surgery? I even know you have a hippocampus and a medulla oblongata and all those kind of things. Frontal cortex. You know, I got the language down. I could probably operate. I did in college. I had to circle the parts of the brain. It's been a while since I've been in college. But the hippocampus, I remember, looks like a little seahorse. I could look around until I found a seahorse in your head. I could dig around there. And hey, it's not a problem because the brain's not supposed to feel any pain anyway. Now, getting to it may. This is not a hard thing for me to understand. Judge not simply means don't judge on your own imperfect judgments. If you're going to judge, make sure you're going to be judged by the standard by which you will be judged. Because if you go beyond, you're going to be judged beyond. And if you don't go what it says, then you're not going to be saved by the same grace that's offered. Judge not that ye be not condemned. Isn't that what he said and what Luke recorded? So we're talking about forgiveness, and all of these illustrations are, can the blind lead the blind? Are you going to use the authority of somebody who doesn't know where they're going to get there? How many of you have ever driven somewhere and said, this looks right to me? I was talking to several over the years of our helicopter pilots, and I was amazed to find out that a lot of them, when they fly around here at Fort Rucker, follow the highways because they know where they're going. It's hard to follow trees. You got instruments, you got a compass, but it sure is a whole lot easier to follow I-85 or I-65 or highway Interstate 10 or something like that than it is to follow a compass that I got to get out and get my map. You know those pants they have down there? They got the map in the leg and pull it and all that. GPS, all that good stuff. But you want an authority you can trust. You don't want somebody that's messed up your compass. You don't want somebody that's messed up your GPS. You want to make sure that you're back to the standard. Yes. Absolutely. No. I love my family, but I left my wife. I love my children, but I left them behind for somebody else to raise. Those are not congruent statements. Let's pick up the reading again. Verse 30 simply says, know who you're following, because if you're blind or following the blind, they're going to fall and get themselves into trouble. Verse 40 said, the disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. And why beholdest thou the mote that's in thy brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that's in thine own eye? Either how canst thou say to thy brother, brother, let me pull out the mote that's in your eye, when thou beholdest not the beam that is in your own eye? Thou hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. What is the mote in a brother's eye? Anybody have a different? The mote is the speck. The beam is the log. Okay, you got anybody ever get a little speck of dirt or an eyelash in your eye? That is maddening, isn't it? And somebody told me if you pull your upper lid over your bottom lid or your bottom lid over your other lid, it'll come out. It hadn't worked for me. I about pulled my eyelids off trying to make that work. I've taken water and washed my eye out, and I keep closing my eye when the water hits it. And it's just maddening. And then every once in a while, somebody will say, let me get that out of your eye for you. Who do you think I'm going to let put their fingers in my eyeball? Especially if they've got a 2x4 coming out of theirs, or a log coming out of theirs. Thank you, Doc. I will do that next time. Because it is going to happen to me again, I guarantee you. Slap myself, beat myself. Just, y'all don't take me away when I start doing that. If I get in the pulpit one day and start doing this, y'all say, there's a mote in his eye. So, again, within the context of what we're talking about, he's talking about judging. He's talking about the standard that we judge by, and how can I judge you, or how can I help you if you've got a little speck in your eye and I've got a big log in my eye? I actually think the Lord had a sense of humor. I think this is an illustration of it. Can you imagine what a person would look like with a log coming out of their eye? When I allow my mind to go into trying to depict it, I can just see them swing around and just wipe out 2 or 3 people with that log in their eye. And then when they try to get close enough to your eye, they keep hitting you in the head. But how many people do you know that are more than willing to straighten somebody else out without taking care of their own problems first? How many people want to give advice when they don't really have any to spare? How many people want to take care of your business when they can't take care of their own business? Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying don't preach the gospel. Preach the gospel. Go into all the world. We have that great commission to do. I'm not saying hold back on the truth. The truth will set you free. But I'm saying look in the mirror before you get too carried away with trying to figure somebody else out. Right. Or the problems they're trying to work out right now. That is the blind leading the blind. I remember telling one, and I meant this in the nicest, sweetest way I could mean it. But I had this little teenager about 13 years old come up to me, and they had a problem, and they said, Brother Keith, and I said, yes, what can I do for you? And they said, I got a problem. I said, okay. But I can't talk to my parents about it. Why? They won't understand. In my head, I'm thinking, you're thinking the preacher's going to understand, you know your parents won't. But I try to be understanding, and I say, okay, I said, who have you asked for help? Well, I don't go to my older brothers and sisters because they'll tell on me. I don't go to my parents because I'll get in trouble. So I went to my friends. And you're a 13-year-old and you can't figure this out, so you went to the other 13-year-olds that don't know to see what they don't know either, and you all came together with what you don't know to figure this out. What's the standard of judgment that we use? We need to use truth. Whether it's measuring out our medicine, whether it's going to the grocery store, whether it's getting a fair measure of what we buy in the market, all of those things are there. But the question is, how can you say to your brother, let me pull the mote that's in thine eye out, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam which is in thy own eye? I had studied this verse for a long time before I understood what he was saying. It's not just you got a beam in your eye, it's that you don't know you have a beam in your eye. Isn't that what it says there? You're trying to get somebody else's speck out of their eye when you don't know you've got a log in your eye. There's a internet thing that I wish I'd thought about putting up on the screen for you today, so I'm going to tell you about it. It won't be nearly as good. Those of you who like to do internet research can go look at it. It's called It's Not the Nail. And there's this couple sitting there, and they're having a discussion. And the husband is being depicted as not understanding his wife, and the wife is trying to explain to him. And she says, you're always trying to tell me what to do. You're always trying to answer questions that I'm not asking. I just need you to listen. I just need you to be present. I just need you to be here. And he's saying, I think the problem is you have a nail stuck in your head. And they draw out, and there's this nail coming out of her head. And she says, it's not the nail. Folks, it is the nail. She says, my sweaters are all pulled, and this every time I reach for something, my head starts hurting like something sharp's in there. And he's saying, I understand, that must be terrible. And she says, oh, now you understand. She reaches in to hug him, and when she does, she hits the nail on his forehead, and says, oh, and he says, it's the nail. I think for many of us, it's the beam. We're trying to tell everybody else what to do when there's a beam in our own eye. In my little thing that I watched about It's Not the Nail, it was obvious to everybody who sees the clip, she has a nail in her head. Why is it obvious to the rest of the world that we have a beam in our eye and we can't see it ourselves? We're blinded by our own beam because we don't want to see it, or because we're more interested in looking at somebody else's problem, because we don't want to fix our problems, because most of us have accommodated the beam or the sin or whatever it is that's in our lives, and we don't want to deal with it. So he says, how can you judge somebody else who has a speck in their eye when you've got a beam in your own? He's pretty strong when he comes back and he says, you're a hypocrite. Jesus talks strongly about the hypocrites, and he says the first thing you've got to do before you can help anybody else, the absolute first thing you have to do is take care of business with yourself. You got to get that beam out of your eye. You got to get straightened up. You got to sweep around your own doorstep, whatever those cliches are that you use. How many people you think have that part perfected, that they get their own life straight before they start telling other people how to live? And nobody here has probably ever had anybody give them unsolicited advice, have you? Sometimes solicited advice is not really what people want. I live in fear of women who come into the church building and say, how do I look in this outfit? I want to say, what did your husband say? Because there may be marriage counseling coming up. I need to know that. I hate to tell you what I say because y'all, if I ever say it to you, you're going to laugh at me. But I had this young lady come in one time. She was college age, and she said, how you like this outfit? And I said, I love the girl in the outfit. She said, you don't like the outfit? I said, I love the girl in the outfit. Let's set ourselves up for success by looking at our own problems. If you're questioning the outfit, don't wear it in the first place. The only thing worse is for you to be asked, do I look fat in this outfit? Why do people ask those kind of questions? Rob, I'm going to send them all to you. You can take care of it. The answer is, I love the girl in the outfit. Well, they rang the bell. But I want you to listen to this last part again. Thou hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, then you shall see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. It seems to me that he's making a great deal of importance out of this part of we need to be able to see clearly before we get in the business of judging others. When I'm overweight, I always look for the heavy-set doctors. I'm not going to any skinny, healthy doctor that's running 5 miles a day. Well, they are the right ones, but I'm going to go to one where I can say, have you looked in the mirror lately, Doc? Go ahead, David. Yeah. We all have the glasses that we look through. The kind of correlating response that I heard the story, and it's a sermon illustration, so I've probably used it before. It's the lady that was washing her dishes. She looked out her kitchen window and she saw her neighbor's laundry. And the neighbor's laundry looked really dingy. And so she called her up on the phone and she said, I'm not trying to take care of your business, but I just think you ought to know that your laundry didn't get clean. I can see it from my window, and it's just kind of dingy. You probably ought to wash it again before you do it. So lady goes, gets her laundry, and washes it again. She comes out, she hangs it up, and the lady calls back and says, it's still dirty. Goes, washes it again, hangs it up a third time. The lady calls up and says, still dirty. And so the lady with the laundry says, would you mind washing your windows before you tell me about my laundry? That's what Jesus is saying, isn't he? When he's saying, get the beam out of your eye before you go trying to pick motes out. It's easy to see somebody else's dingy laundry. It's easy to see somebody else's sin. It's easy to see somebody else's problem and not deal with our own. Let me ask, in the spiritual sense, how effective are we as witnesses of Christ if we won't take care of our own business and tell somebody else how they ought to live? What did Jesus tell the Pharisees? He called them a bunch of hypocrites. Whitewashed sepulchres, which are inwardly filled with dead men's bones. And so, part of the answer here is, what is it that we're portraying when we're trying to tell everybody else what to do when our own shortcomings are so obvious? Anyway, that's where we're going to stop. Next week we're going to have a Mexican fiesta, and we're going to sing because it is the last Wednesday of the month. Not the fourth, the last. Sometimes the fourth Wednesday is the last. And if you brought supper, if you'll just leave it here, we'll take care of it for lunch tomorrow.
Philippians chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, reads, "So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God as a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Those few verses there are very countercultural. In our world today, someone doesn't let go of power to become a servant. Nobody would give you the advice to look past the interests of somebody else. Nobody would expect you to lift someone up and put yourself down. But that's what the instructions were to the Philippians there from Paul, to forget about themselves and focus on others. And I wonder what impact that would have on our community if they looked at our church and thought, yeah, that College Avenue church, everybody I know from College Avenue, so-and-so goes to College Avenue, he's constantly serving someone else. If they saw us on a regular basis putting someone else's interests and needs above our own. The big picture is that we're trying to go to heaven and take as many people as possible with us there. And it's easy sometimes to get caught up in the day-to-day life, our own interests, and forget about that big picture. But somewhere in our world around us, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our schools, actually not just somewhere, but everywhere, there are people hurting, people suffering, and people who are lost. And having have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. It's an interesting phrase there. A mind given to us by Christ Jesus. That mindset is what's going to save our neighbors. It's what's going to save our coworkers, our schoolmates. It's what's going to save the world around us. And so tonight, if there's something that maybe is separating you from God, that's interfering that mindset, or you don't have a relationship with God, we would like to help you with that. If you have a need tonight, please come while we stand and while we sing.